just call Linda.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're just about ready to get started then. All right, well, I'd like to welcome you all this evening to the York County History Center. My name is Brian Bailey. For those of us who may be watching at home via Facebook, we'd encourage you to leave any comments you have for Mr. Sheaffer in the comments on the video stream, and we will ask them at the end of his presentation. Before we get started with this evening's program, I have just a few announcements. On the York County History Center's website, we have a new virtual exhibit that just went up this past week. It is titled "Energy Awaits: The Smith-Putnam Wind Turbine and the Beginning of Modern Wind Energy in America." This is the world's first megawatt wind turbine that S. Morgan Smith, the company here in York, funded and created up in Vermont. So I think it might be of interest. If anyone has an interest in industrial history of York, this should be right up your alley. On October 28th, James Manuel will be doing a webinar on the history of the Smith-Putnam wind turbine, which is tomorrow evening. That'll be a online only event. There'll be a live stream you'll be able to find on our website and on Facebook. On November 7th, the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society will be hosting Scott Mingus. We'll be talking about churches and chaplains during the Civil War in York County. On November 13th, which is a Saturday, we have two events going on that day. There'll be the second Saturday lecture, which will be here, which will feature Tracy Lawson telling Anna Stone's Daring Bride to Valley Forge, using family lore as the basis for a historical novel. And going on at the Colonial Complex that day from 10 to 3 will be the Articles of Confederation Day. This is a free, open to the public event where we have all sorts of activities, hands-on activities for families, for kids, related to the Articles of Confederation, which were this country's first governing documents that were ratified here in York when the Continental Congress was here in 1777. If you have any interest in colonial American history, I would heartily encourage you to head to the Colonial Complex on November the 13th. And just one additional note that this is the last Allvets event for this year. We will be back in January for more presentations, but this is the last one for this year. So I know it's the end of October, but happy holidays. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Don Sheaffer, who will be talking about his service with the SeaBees. Thank you.
As he said, I'm Don Sheaffer, retired naval officer, Civil Engineer Corps, born and raised in Hummelstown. I went to school in Hummelstown. I was appointed to the Naval Academy 1958, graduated in 63, and commissioned an ensign in the Civil Engineer Corps. After my education, I was sent to SeaBees Military Construction Battalion 7 in Wei Fu Bai, RBN. But before we begin, I'm looking to see, is there any World War II vets here? No? Vietnam? Korea? And I don't see any other younger than that. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Good. Well, thank you all for your service, and thank you all for coming and supporting this program. I heard through the grapevine, though, that one of our guardian angels went up to heaven and reported to God that all vets, 95% of all vets, are misbehaving. Now, God was a little concerned about that, so he sent another angel down, and he said, and the angel came down and said, yep, that's true. 95% of vets are misbehaving. So God thought about this for a little while, and he said, well, I'm going to send an email, an encouraging email to the 5% that have been good. What do you think it said? Anybody? I don't know. I didn't get the email either. Tonight, I want to share with you what SeaBees are and my experiences and privilege of serving in the SeaBees. As a Civil Engineer Corps officer, we are not career SeaBees. And not all CEC officers actually get the privilege of serving with the SeaBees. So first, I need to tell you a little bit about the Civil Engineer Corps. And that little sign right there is the insignia of the Civil Engineer Corps. If we go back to the Revolutionary War, there was no Navy. The Army was founded in June of 1775. The Marines in November of 1775, but there was no Navy. In fact, there was a commission that decided they would buy 8 small ships, give them to privateers, and let them go out and harass the shipping from the British shipping that was supporting the English troops. Now, when you work for a company in a private ship, you're a privateer. Otherwise, you're just a pirate. But that's what we had, a bunch of pirates forming the Navy during the Revolutionary War. Well, the Navy was formed in 1794, and in 1776, they built 2 major ships, and they're very famous, the Constellation and the Constitution, and that was, they were designed to support American shipping because the British and the French ships were hijacking our ships at sea. So that was actually the first organized Navy. Well, from the Revolutionary War to about 1890, all of the facilities that were being built were actually managed and built by the civilians. Navy seagoing officers would manage those contracts, but basically it was all done by civilians. But in 1890 to 1898, the Bureau of Yards and Docks was formed, who then hired commissioned civil engineers to manage the shore establishment. Thus, we got the Civil Engineer Corps, and they were responsible for the design, the maintenance, the construction of the shore establishment. And after starting in 1942, serving as the officers with the SeaBees. So, what are SeaBees? Well, if you ask a Marine, are there any Marines in the? Hoorah. Hoorah. Well, please don't ask the Marine what a SeaBee is, because his definition will be definitely different than mine, and we can't share that in mixed company. Well, at the outbreak of World War II, the nation needed advanced bases as we went across the Pacific. So through the Bureau of Yards and Docks that had been established back in 1890, they let contracts to private construction firms, took them out with a small force, protection force, and let them begin construction of advanced bases. Well, sure enough, the Japanese decided they didn't like that, and they assaulted, in fact, did injure a number of the construction people. So the Bureau of Yards and Docks thought about this, and they said, you know, if we arm those construction guys, train them to be combat proven, we can get a twofer. Now I have a construction force. I also have a military force. So that was the birth of the SeaBees. And I don't know, any of you have seen the movie called John Wayne and the Fighting SeaBees? Yeah, okay. So you know the story from that. Basically, that was just what I said. Contracting firm went out. They got chewed up by an assault from the Japanese. And so they came back and armed them and made them a military construction workforce. So a SeaBee is a sailor, has construction skills. He's trained to build military facilities, and he's trained by Marines. Now, I don't want to offend my Marine friend, but I have to tell you a story. The SeaBees say they think they're Marines with brains. Now, you wonder, we said, well, why do you say you're a SeaBee with brains? And he said, well, consider, when we do an amphibious assault, we let the Marines go first. Secondly, we don't deal with any IEDs or bombs or mines. We just let the Marines do that. Thirdly, the Marines go out and hunt the enemy. We don't, we stay back and make them come to us. And fourthly, if you watch the Marines, they do an awful lot of training. And the SeaBees think they train to be miserable. SeaBees can be miserable without training at all. So let's talk a little bit about the SeaBees in World War II. These were mobile construction companies of battalions. They were organized just like Marine battalions, take their equipment, go out to many of the islands. They went actually from Hawaii all the way to Okinawa and served in a lot of islands in between. They built airfields was the primary thing they needed to support the planes. They built hospitals, they built piers, they built buildings for house the people. They built tanks to support fuel, water, and of course, they always have to make the outhouse. That was one of our favorites. Well, there were in the Pacific, there were 350,000 SeaBees served during that time. Of that number, only 300 were KIA. 2,000 received Purple Heart. That's a very small ratio, but they were all important, obviously. But the SeaBees were not only in World War II in the Pacific, they actually served in the European theater. If the assault into Sicily, which was 1943, was made possible by the invention of the floating causeway. Without the floating causeways, they would not have been able to get the equipment ashore. And this picture will show you that ship in the background. It's an LST, landing ship tank. So underneath is where you'd have your tanks and all your equipment. But because of the gradient of that water, it was so shallow, by the time the LST would be able to put its ramp down and let them out, it was too deep water for the equipment to get in. So what they did, the SeaBees designed and built those causeways. So what is the causeway? Those are 5 by 5 by 7 steel boxes that are bolted together, and you can put them in any configuration you want. But that particular configuration was then strapped on the side of that LST. While they were out at sea, you drop them in the water. That little Higgins boat on the left would put them together. You would bring it into the shore. The LST then can come, drop its ramp on the out, and the equipment can roll ashore. That was the only way they could get the heavy equipment ashore in Sicily. Didn't only happen in Sicily. In Normandy, before we do that, this floating causeway can also be elevated to make a pier. You see the boxes that are bolted together? You build that, you run a crane, which is a little dangerous from floating, but you put a crane on that and you drive those piles down beside, attached to the boxes, put chains on the top with that reel, and then you can motorize and hoist them up. You can actually put them up in the air, drive a ship alongside, and walk off just like it's a deck or a pier anywhere else. That really speeds up the ship-to-shore transfer of men, equipment, supplies, and it was a godsend for a lot of the wars. Okay, now we'll go there. In Normandy, this is a shot of pontoon causeways. You can hardly see them because they're sitting low in the water. But you see all the equipment, the trucks, and they put them together in long chains, and they would bring them into the shore. This was a CB camp in Normandy, right after, not long after the actual invasion. And then there's another shot here with an LST again, bringing in the equipment, but he's tied up to one of those piers that made out of the causeways, which facilitated getting equipment. SeaBees also, I'm told, actually made concrete box piers over in England and brought them across and made permanent piers on the Normandy to bring all the equipment and stuff aboard. There were over 10,000 of those boxes were made during World War II. It took over 36,000 tons of steel. Now you think about it, that steel took a lot of space to transport. But if they were already in a box form, it would have horrendous space. So they took the steel to the site. The SeaBees would actually build the boxes on site, put them together, and make those pontoon causeways. SeaBees were also in Korea at the Incheon landing in Korea. There's actually causeway, and all during the Korean conflict, all along the coast, SeaBees would support the invasions as they went along the coast, building the facilities, airfields, cantonments, magazines, anything that they needed, hospitals particularly, to support the troops as they advanced. Now, let me for a minute talk about construction in Vietnam. This is Vietnam. Many of you are very familiar, you've been there, probably don't want to go back. The north, above the DMZ there, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and there's various little divisions within South Vietnam. But after World War II, the monarchy in RVN collapsed. The French tried to reestablish a colony, but were defeated in what is now called the First Indochina War. The UN Geneva Convention Accords in 1954 partitioned the country in two places. That's the reason for the DMZ. This was in 1954. And they were supposedly to be temporary, but Russia and China disagreed that there should be no free elections. So it stayed two countries up until, still is, or until we lost it. Between World War II and the French Indian War, much of that infrastructure within the country was destroyed. So in 1956, South Vietnam president asked for US help in developing the damaged structures. CB units surveyed the country and assisted the Vietnamese in begin building with an $80 million grant from the United States. Under the Bureau of Yards and Docks contract, private engineering and construction firms began planning and assisting in reconstruction of the bridges, the roads, and other facilities. During that early reconstruction period, from 1962 to 1965, CB teams supported 26 military special forces employed to assist in combating the Viet Cong and the Communist North, who were fighting to overthrow the Southern government. In 1966, this is where we actually begin to see CBs that we know. The Bureau of Yards and Docks was renamed to the Navy Facilities Engineering Command and designated as the construction agent for DoD Vietnam for a $2 billion construction program. From 1965 to 1972, private contractors and all military construction forces, that is the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and Air Force units, together built completed the program for building the bridges, the ports, the airfields, telephones, electrical power, all those things you need to run your country. It involved over 55,000 military forces 26,000 which were SeaBees. Of the 26,000 SeaBees that served, 85 were KIA, killed in action, but there were 500 killed in construction accidents. It's a pretty dangerous business. So let me now turn to my service in Vietnam. NMCB 7, who I said earlier when I was assigned to that when I graduated from graduate school, was deployed to Hue Phu Bai in March '66. After graduation, I was sent to military training before joining the battalion as their engineering officer in October. The battalion's mission was to build an airstrip. Okay. Oh, okay, we'll start with this. Okay, if you can see in MCB 7, MCB 7 went to Fort Campbell, which is Hue Phu Bai, in March. I didn't join it until October. So I was almost just at the end of that deployment. As you can, this chart, what it does, it shows you where all the battalions were. There's the battalions, 21 of them. These are the camps that they were in. All of this was in the I Corps area. This is the I Corps. It runs from down here is Shields, Camp Shields. Da Nang is major support. And what Hue Phu Bai is up here. And then there was a group that we supported with an air base up in Dong Ha. In 1965, the 3rd Marine, along with Amphibious Construction Battalion 1 and Amphibious Construction Battalion 10, did an amphibious assault here at Camp at Chu Lai and established a base of operation. Their job was to set up an airfield and the cantonment to support the Marines. And then they would begin working on a road from here up to Da Nang. Da Nang was a major port. There was a major airfield in Da Nang. So a lot of supplies and shipping came into Da Nang. When we went to Hue Phu Bai, here's Campbell. Okay, here's Campbell. Our job went there was to build an airfield, to build this road back down, build this back down here to Da Nang so we could get supplies, build a cantonment for the battalion and for the Marines, 3rd Marines. Johnny, go ahead and show the airstrip. This is the airstrip we built up at Dong Ha. We had a detachment go to Dong Ha, and we built an airstrip. What they're laying here, first of all, you make a smooth surface. Then you took what's called Marston matting. They're metal, long metal plates. You fasten them together to make the landing field. And then if you did an apron, they're making an apron here. Over top of those matting, they're actually putting rubber so for the parking area of the aircraft. But when we were building ours in Hue Phu Bai, here's a good putting the matting on. In Phu Bai, well, this is a completed airfield. We actually had to move a number of Vietnamese families who had houses in this road, and we built new housing for them off to the side here away from the airport. Here you can see a good picture of the Marston matting. While we were laying this at their airstrip in Hue Phu Bai, the VC, we would be at one end working, the VC would come and mortar one end of the airfield. Now, the neat part about these are, you just take a torch, cut out the ones you need and replace them. So you didn't have to do a lot of other work, fill the hole if there's a big hole. So we were able to keep that airfield running around the clock for the full time we were there. Some of the other facilities we built, we supported the hospital. We built a number of hospital type facilities throughout the area. This is from Ag 16 and for AMAD. These were just standard hooches that we were able to put out of the, there you can see a walkway to get out of the mud. This was a SeaBee camp in March when the SeaBees first went in. It was a tent camp like everybody else. That was the tent camp when I got there. This was in October. They were steel, the hooches. They had the wooden frame, metal roof. These are pits. These are mortar pits. So if we had an attack, we'd go out the side into the pit. The problem was those pits housed snakes occasionally. So we always made sure the big guys got in first. So when we got in, you were laying on a guy, you didn't have to worry about the snake. We also drilled a lot of water, wells for water. This was what the guys started building these, mass producing these so we could produce the hooches a lot faster. Here's the base for one of the hooches. And this was start of our medical facility on camp. We did power work, poles, culverts, sewage. This was start of a metal storage facility. This was a tent that was, when we first got there, this was the housing. Alpha Company. Alpha Company was one that has all the equipment. So the mechanics and the equipment operators would have out of here, they repair the equipment inside here. And then one of our best sellers was this. Yeah, that's an outhouse. And a lot of guys that did behave, they spent a lot of time out here burning those pots. No one here did though, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty much what happened in Vietnam. Go ahead. There's a couple other pictures, I think, Jonathan. When we got there, we were building a road, I said, to the Nang. But we also built this causeway out into the river, and we often got a lot of our supplies would come up the river onto this causeway. A real funny story, I was coming out one day, and the battalion officer was in front of me, and he ran his Jeep off of this about right there. His Jeep was in the water. The XO's Jeep was up here. The CO got out of his Jeep, walked over, said to the XO, "Your Jeep's mine, yours is down there." So he had to pull it. We had to, of course, everyone couldn't hardly laugh. The CO's Jeep was in the water. But sometime late in the deployment, the VC came and blew up part of this causeway. So we actually had to survive on canned meatballs for a couple of weeks until we repaired the causeway. Here they're doing for the Fort Logistics Support Unit. This was a dining facility. They're putting a roof on it. Over here, they're making a containment, concrete containment for sewage. And here we're just doing a lot of flattening the area, get ready for construction. Okay. Before I moved to our second deployment, we also had a 13-meter perimeter defense. All of you did it in Vietnam. You had a cantonment. Each of you had a section of the perimeter that you protected. We had a 13-meter that we had our security team would actually spend their time in those areas. The kids always like to ask, well, "Granddad, did you shoot anyone?" Well, except for cleaning my pistol, and why they gave me just the pistol to get into the country, I never thought it much about, but that's all I had. But I only took my pistol out of my holster twice. When I was up in Wei Fubai, shortly after I joined the battalion, the command master chief said, let's go out and I'll make sure your weapon will fire. We'll go out to an area where we shoot and you can fire your weapon. So now I'm relatively new. I've been in country maybe a week. And as we're leaving the cantonment, I'm starting to get a little nervous. You can feel the pucker factor starting. So as we got partway out, a Vietnamese jumps out of the brush, aims his rifle at the Jeep. Now, of course, I whip out my pistol, I put it ready, I'm ready to shoot, and the chief says, "Don't shoot." Why not? Well, it turned out it actually was a Vietnamese training facility, and they thought we were part of their training. And nothing, needless to say, when we got out to the shooting, it took me a long time to break the pucker between my seat and my backside to shoot. The second time I'll talk about when we do our deployment to Da Nang. So in the battalion deployed in May of 67 to January 68 to Da Nang. I was assigned as the Delta Company commander. Now, we were now back down in Da Nang. So it was a little safer area. Our company actually operated a concrete batch plant. So we had a concrete batch plant. We made concrete. We had concrete trucks, and we'd send them out to the various units to build concrete type facilities for them. That's a house we built to cover that batch plant. We also had a block plant. That machine actually would make block, and we can make about 100 blocks a day. So we were obviously very well liked by everyone. You get really popular when you have a concrete batch plant and a block plant in a combat zone coming. So we had to decide. I had a hard time keeping up with my drivers because I never knew where the trucks were going. I never knew what they got for it either, and I certainly didn't want to know. So we also had a hospital expansion. There was a naval hospital that had been started in Da Nang. We started building some more facilities, put in some beds. Well, we also built that facility to house all of the waste that came out of the hospital. Now, a story about that. When I went on the field and they gave me the site to build it, I said, it's 3 feet too high. And the surveyor said, no, it's actually right. I said, no, it's 3 feet too high. So we argued for a while and I lost. So we built it. After we built it, they came and said, sir, we made a mistake. It's 3 feet too high. Okay, now, this thing is 12 by 12, concrete walls about as thick as about 12-inch walls. It's a big concrete box. So I had to figure out how do I get it down 3 feet. So what we did is we put a hole in the center, took a hose, high pressure hose, and started going around the sides, and eventually we got it down almost level. When we were close, I said, cap it so it's level and we're done. But that was a fun project. The other thing we built, there's a better picture of that concrete structure. It's massive. The nurses' quarters. Before we got there were no nurses. There were just medics and the doctors, but they sent a lot of nurses, so we had to build a nurses' quarter, just basically Quonset huts. And this lady happened to be a commander, nurse commander. And I had a number of troops working down there, periodically I'd be down to check on the construction. Nobody's working. I said, guys, you're supposed to be building. Well, this commander would say, oh, Lieutenant, it's really hot today. I really took pity on him. Just give him a break. I said, ma'am, I have a schedule I gotta build. No, so what could I do? She outranked me. So our troops, I finally got them to build, but it wasn't pretty. Okay, go back to the blog. There we go. The other thing I said that I pulled my weapon out of my holster twice. The second time, I was driving out to see the block plant operating, and I had an assistant company commander with me. We got out there, and I was pointing my hand like this at the machine, and I was too close, and at just all of a sudden, steel rod went right through my hand, this part of my hand. So now I'm bleeding, and I said, Jim, you got to drive me to the hospital. I said, get in the Jeep. Get in the Jeep. And he said, sir, if I see blood, I might faint. I took my pistol out, I laid it on my lap, and I said, Jim, if you faint, I'm going to shoot you. So we drove to the hospital. I get to the hospital, and this doctor, the lieutenant, said, you guys will shoot yourself, just do anything to get out of serving. Took the pistol, I put it right under his nose, and I said, smell it. Did I shoot him? No. Then please fix me. Well, I was convinced that that was actually a VC block plant. And therefore I should have got a Purple Heart. Unfortunately, it was not deemed that. And all I got was a purple butt. I was in the hospital for 10 days, 4 shots of penicillin a day for 10 days. By the time I was done, my backside was purple. Now, in that ward, I saw men who had been wounded in combat get up, get out of there. The nurse was a little Vietnamese. She was weighed about 75 pounds. And she would put that needle on you and go. But she had the patience of Job. Guys would finally sneak back in, go to sleep. After you were asleep, boom. So sleep was not very good in that ward. I understand after the Tet Offensive, which was in that period, a young Marine got out of the Marines and went to college. And he had to take a philosophy course. And the professor kept saying, there is no God. God is dead, there is no God. Now this really got on this Marine's nerves, but he didn't say anything until one day, the professor got up and said, today I'll prove there's no God. I'm going to stand on this chair, and if there is a God, he will knock me off of this chair. So he's standing there saying, there's no God, there's no God. The Marine gets up and knocks him right off the chair. He's laying down, he looks up and he says, what was that for? And the Marine said, God was busy taking care of all the men and women who give you the right to stand up there and say that, so he sent me. So good for that Marine. He knew by the grace of God, he was there and not somewhere else. Okay, my other CB service, I was at the 30th Naval Construction Regiment on Guam. Oh, we have some, yeah, those are the pictures for Da Nang. I was at the Naval Construction, 30th Naval Construction in Guam from 79 to 81. And our job was to manage military construction forces operating in the Pacific. So anywhere in the Pacific Basin, there was construction going on that period. Our job, we would find the jobs for them, go out and monitor what they were doing. One of my favorites, though, is we also did a civic action project down in the Islands of Micronesia. In 1960, President Kennedy took a trip down through all the islands that we had been in during World War II. And basically, the Japanese were there, they tore it up, we bombed it, everybody left. So the president said in 20 years, I want these people to be self-sufficient. I want them to have infrastructure. I want them, we will be their protectorate. They can use our monetary system, but I want them to be independent. So we had SeaBee teams down in all those islands. We had an Air Force team, an Army team, a Red Horse team on various islands. And our job in Guam was to support them, fly them supplies, food, make sure we had the right jobs for them. It was a great job. It was a lot of fun. I was stationed on Guam at the 30th Naval Construction Division. My family will tell me they were on Guam 2 years. I was on Guam 9 months. That's how much I had to go down to Micronesia or all through the Pacific. But it was a fun job. My third tour at SeaBees was in Amphibious Construction Battalion 2. This is, again, amphibious construction battalions were the battalions that operated those causeways with the Navy. After being away from the Navy for 20 years, I had to go back aboard ship to learn all the stuff over, which I forgot. Well, I was not at sea. And we then took these causeways with 6 weeks, and we would train with them. We'd land, we'd make an amphibious assault. We had the beach group and the Navy amphibious forces. We'd operate with them. We would pump fuel from the water in. We'd put the causeways in, put tanks, let the tanks come in. That was a fun job too. Go ahead. Again, I'll show you, we put one of these in with made some piers. And unfortunately, this was not there when I was in. This is the newest system that replaced all those causeways. These are what the amphibs have today. And they're called Navy Library System Improved, NINLS. Okay. I happen to see one of those in Little Creek. Really neat. They have their own power system. They still can marry ones to it and still make the causeways for long distance. But they actually, they float. I mean, they have a motor and they become ships. So I retired from military service in 1987. And of course, SeaBee units are still continued to serve in every conflict since, as well as supporting humanitarian service after natural disasters. SeaBees military construction forces are not allowed to build inside the United States unless it is during a natural disaster. It's by law. I worked for the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education when I retired as their facilities officer for 15 years, retired in 2002. So let me close with, this is a tale about a non-conforming sparrow. It seems there was a sparrow up in New York, decided he was not going to fly south for winter. That was for the birds, the other birds, not him. It was too far. And by the way, it was pretty mild winter, so he thought he would stay. Well, as it got colder, he began to realize that maybe he had made a mistake. So he took off and he began flying south. Got colder and colder. And at one point, he just couldn't fly anymore and he falls to the ground. Fortunately, he flew right and fell right into a barnyard. And fortunately for him, there was a cow in the barnyard, and the cow came and just defecated right on top of the bird. Now that manure began to warm that bird up, and he was just happy as could be. So he stuck his head out and he began to chirp for all it was worth, just so happy. Unfortunately, there was a cat in the barnyard. The cat came and ate the bird. Now, the moral of the story is those who get you into it are not necessarily your enemies. Those who get you out of it are not necessarily your friends. But if you're in it up to your neck and you're happy about it, for crying out loud, keep your mouth shut. So I'm done. Have any questions, anything I can answer for you that I didn't touch on?
Sounded really good.
What, I was thinking this when I saw those two fellows, that they were lifting these big long pieces of, that you put it together to make it, the rug,
The matting?
yeah. And each one of them had the end, and it took a lot of them to fix the place. How much did those weigh? Those guys must have had to lift and move a lot of heavy stuff.
They were probably maybe 80 pounds. They weren't all that heavy, but
They kept doing it. There's
Well,
quite a few-
with two guys, it was easier to match them to put them down. One guy trying to lay it and put it in place was tough. So a guy in each end could just put it down,
Okay.
lay it. That's why there were two, not so much, but after a hard day of doing that, it's a long airfield. Yeah,
That's what I was thinking.
yeah, they would get very
Probably
tired.
tired at the end of the day.
Yeah, they would.
Were there physical requirements to become a member of the SeaBees? Because I've seen you doing some pretty heavy work.
No, they had the basic requirement to get into the service. In World War II, yeah, there were a lot of big guys made it. Now, a lot of the younger men are just regular kids that come out and go into SeaBees. A lot of them come out of your vocational training schools because they already have the basic training for construction, for a skill. But there's no restricting requirements as to size, but you have to have that same height-weight ratio. And that's what they look at. It's the height-weight ratio. Yeah.
Quick follow-up on that. In the Marines, they said, this is what you're going to do, bang. How does one wind up in SeaBees?
Well, that's actually the Navy recruiter right now. During World War II, they just took complete companies, construction companies, and said, you now are in the Navy. Welcome. Here's
Sounds familiar.
yeah. Yeah, they were drafted. But now they basically go to your recruiter and say that's what you want to do, because it's all volunteer now.
When you went in, you went through basic training like everybody else?
Well, basic training with the Marines. The Marines had a special training for SeaBees. I went through that training. I didn't go through boot camp but I went to the Naval Academy, so every summer we did different training. But I didn't go through boot camp like most of the enlisted do.
So how did you guys get promoted?
Well, the SeaBees, we'll take the SeaBees, they would get promoted when we came back. If you want that one chart, stick the one up with the one with the deployments. There. If you see on this chart, I'll go with M67. They went here. They came home here. That's 9 months, basically. They were home here until they went back to Camp Admiral. This would have been down Da Nang. I was here in Phu, we were here in Da Nang. Okay. During this period, the SeaBees would go to different schools when we were home. So if you were an electrician, you'd go to electrician school and you had to take the various tests before you could be eligible to go to advancement. And then it was up to your military grade, your recommendation by your officers. But you got promoted based on service and knowledge through these schools. They had what's called ABC schools. A was a basic, B next, and then C. And then the officers, we would serve, besides just serving with the SeaBees, as I said, I would serve with a public works department on a base somewhere. And just every so often, there's a board that meets and decide which officers, based on their performance.
So for those 6 months that you were home, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, 5 months
Yeah.
that you were home, you went to school?
They went to schools, and then the last 2 months, we went to military training camp Lejeune. Our battalion was in Davisville, Rhode Island. So we flew down to Camp Lejeune, did military training there for about 6 weeks, and then went back, got everything together, flew to Vietnam.
Now, would you get washed out of the CV, to meet the combat requirements, right?
Probably, I don't know of anyone that did, honestly. But I guess you would. No, I really don't know. Never ran into it.
So you were punished under the UCMJ just like,
Oh, yeah. Everybody, yes. UCMJ. I can tell you this one story, it's kind of cute. When I was in Da Nang, one of my troops went under, he had a knife and he went under one of the hooches and he didn't want to come out. So I went under when I was talking with him and he said, well, Lieutenant, I have a knife. He said, I have a gun. So I finally got him out. He went to court martial and he went over to the brig. Well, the Marines operated the brig. So I went to visit him one day and he said, sir, you got to get me out of here. I said, why? No, you were put here for a reason. He said, you know what they make me do? Every morning they give me a bayonet and I got to go out there on my hands and knees and see if I can find a mine. I said, well, son, be very careful. See you. So he did his time in the brig.
What type of military training did you have at Lejeune?
At Lejeune?
Yeah.
Well, we had mortars, we had to use mortars, machine gun, where you put your machine guns on a defensive position, then rifle training, grenades, all the things that basically how to use the weaponry.
Right. So was that Lejeune? It wasn't MacGyver, was it?
Probably, it sounds familiar. It's been a long time. Yeah, I think it actually was a Geiger. Were you,
That's why I went after a boot camp.
you went to Geiger?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we basically serve on the Marines. I mean, I have the greatest respect for the Marines, believe me.
Did you, at the Nang Air Base was all in the full operation when you were there, right?
Yes,
You never did any work there? Any?
no, not really. I mean, if they had a problem that we had an electrician could go over and help them, but no, it was kind of independent operation. I can tell you another quick story about that. That outside the outhouse, I was actually sitting in the outhouse in one of those little planes that had the little rockets on it. It lands, and when it landed, the rocket took off right down the runway. Well, I thought we were under attack. I come out of that building, pants down, jumping in a hole, look up, and my troops are all standing there laughing. That's all because look at the lieutenant. I thought we were under attack just because we were so close to that runway. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.